For the past few years, Rosa has invited a keynote speaker to address the conference. And each time we've heard from really thought provoking and inspiring women who have achieved incredible things in their field. And this year, I'm delighted that we can continue this trend and to very much welcome Zubaida Bai to our conference. Zubaida is a global development executive, a social entrepreneur, and a TED speaker. And she has spent more than 2 decades working at the intersection of women's health, financial inclusion, and systems change. She has achieved a huge amount, and to mention just a few of her achievements, she built a global social enterprise from the ground up, putting a $3 clean birth kit into the hands of more than 1 million mothers across 11 countries. As president and CEO of Grameen Foundation, which is an international development organisation that works with women and girls, Zubaida has mobilised over $150 million and built more than 300 global partnerships. She has spoken to audiences around the world on why investing in women is not a trade-off. In fact, it is the smartest investment any society can make. She's the mother of 3 boys, which will tell you entirely relevant to everything that she is about to say. And Zubaida came to our attention through an article she wrote for Alliance magazine last September. In this, she raised critical concerns about the new prevailing narrative that men and boys are being left behind. And she forcefully argued that this was not only an illusion, but in presenting women and girls as winners at the expense of men and boys was actually causing deep harm to women and girls. And this article stopped me in my tracks because it spoke so clearly to a challenge we are facing in the UK right now, as we are endlessly being asked, why are we focusing on women and girls when it is men and boys who are falling behind? And I can imagine it might be an argument that many of you here today will have also heard. So we felt it was really important to invite Zubaida to share her thoughts and to help us think about this issue in a UK context. And so I'm absolutely delighted that Zubaida has found time in her very busy schedule, when it's actually 7:30 in the morning for her in Colorado, to speak to us today. Zubaida, you're very, very welcome. Hi, Zubaida.
Hi, Rebecca. How are you?
Very well, and welcome to the stage.
Thank
So
you.
I'm gonna step away and let you speak.
Thank you, Rebecca. And hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you today to talk about why organizations working with women and girls matter, and especially now. Let me start by saying something that I believe with every part of my being, which is that the most untapped resource in the world today is not oil, is not gold, it's not data, it's pretty certainly women. And let me start by sharing a story that actually broke my heart. I've been standing for the invisible, which has been the North Star of my life, for over 3 decades now. My journey started when I was probably about 11 or 12, as I recall. And I was home alone with my mother, my aunt, and my grandmother when someone knocked at the door and asked, "Is anybody home?" And my grandmother's immediate response was, "Well, there's nobody home. Come back later." Right? And as a young girl, I started pulling on my grandmother's sari and asking, "Well, why are you saying that? We're all home." And her response was, "Well, there's no men at home. They have to come back later." And I think that left a mark in me as a little girl, not knowing what it was, but I knew it was wrong, right? And decades from then, it was 2024, I was deep into my role at Grameen Foundation. And I was in this village on a field visit, only to realize within moments of reaching there that in the region that we were working, the women that we were serving and the smallholder farmers who were their men, we realized that these men did not even know what the names of their wives were. I'm going to let that sink in, right? How do we begin to talk about gender equity when knowing a woman's name does not even seem important in some parts of the world, right? In fact, digging deeper into it, we realize that some women or some girls, when they're born, they're not even named until they get married because it is for her husband to decide what to name her or call her when she gets married. Now, I'm not sharing this because it's directly to the context that you guys are working in, but I'm trying to set a frame because the fight that each one of us is fighting has ripple effects globally. And that there are so many women and girls out there, and all of them need us today. They need that little voice that we are going to raise. Right. So, with that as a frame, with that as a context, I want to appreciate all the work that every woman does in terms of showing up for another woman. A few years after that, I was actually on another field visit in Uganda this time. And I met this woman called Anna, and she was a smallholder farmer, right? She knew what she was planting. She knew her land very well. She knew what season it was. She knew what her produce is going to look like. She knew exactly everything that she needed to do as a smallholder farmer. But she was at the mercy of her husband to get permission to come work in the field. She was at the mercy of middlemen who told her what her crop was worth or what it was not. And she had no way to verify it. She had no phone, she had no access to market prices, she had no credit, and she was not one of those people in the formal system. And the formal system had never thought about investing in her. So she was not even part of any supply chain, right? Now, when our team went into the community, we did not arrive with answers, but we asked simple questions on why do you not have a phone, Anna? You can afford it, right? And what Anna and the woman around her told us was that it is not that they cannot use a phone. It is that even if they had a phone, the men are going to control those phones in their households. So for us, it was very important to come back and start designing an approach, not just to solve the problem, but to address the root cause of the issue, right? So we started designing this whole approach where we hired local community members that these men would trust, older women, older men, respectful men, religious leaders. And we started this approach called household dialogues or household conversations, where we went into each one of these families of women like Anna, and we started asking simple questions on how much did they value Anna and what value did she have in her own house. We ran individual workshops for men so they understand how supporting their wives and daughters would actually benefit not just them, but the generations to come. And we ensured that Anna was looked at as a full human being in her own household, right? So that before we introduce any technology or financial access to Anna, she was respected as a being in her own house and valued as an individual, which meant as simple as she ate meals with the family at the table, right? And there is data to show, and we did research in India to show that if women only ate meals with family at the table when they were pregnant, their nutrition uptakes and neonatal outcomes go up by over 30%. So now that we had taken care of this household dynamics through this dialogue process, we could then introduce a technology and access to finance for Anna. Now, what I learned here was that you cannot change an outside world for the woman whose inside world does not respect or value her. We had to understand the system architecture. We had to understand the root cause of the problem and not just solve the problem for the sake of solving it. Now, nothing about Anna changed in this process. Her intelligence, her knowledge, her capability, it was always there. What changed was that someone stopped blocking her access and got out of her way so she could show up with her full potential. And that is what I mean when I say women are the most untapped resource in the world. They're not a resource to be extracted, but they are a resource that, when properly supported, they generate everything around them. Stable families, thriving communities, stronger economies, and somehow we still don't seem to believe it. We don't seem to see it, right? And as Rebecca said, I'm a mother of three boys. I've spent my entire career fighting for women and girls. Those two things are not in contradiction with each other, and they have never been. But right now, in 2026, there is a narrative that is growing that says women have advanced far enough. They are the real victims, and that is not true, right? The real victims are being positioned as men and boys, that investing in women comes at the expense of men and boys. And I'm here to tell you that that narrative is not only wrong, but it is very dangerous. And why our work, however small, however local, however underfunded, is more essential today than perhaps any time in the history of our lifetimes. Now, I want to leave you today with three things, right? First one, the clarity and belief that what you do matters, right? Let me repeat that, the clarity and belief that what you do matters. The second is the evidence to say so with confidence. The evidence to say so with confidence. And the third, I want you to leave here knowing that you're not alone and that the knowledge you have is better and the work that you do is better when you join communities like this. So at the end of this conversation, I will be having a Q&A session. So please feel free to start crafting those questions, typing them in chat, even keep making a mental note of it so you don't forget what you want to ask me in the last 15 minutes. So going into my official talk, I think I really want to talk about, have women really made it? And that's the question, right? And the more you ponder over the question and the more you look at evidence, the evidence says otherwise, that women have not made it. Now, there is an argument circulating around in books, in policy papers, in well-meaning conversations. And it goes something like this. Women have made remarkable progress. Girls outperform boys in school. College enrollment and graduation rates for women are now higher than for men than ever before. And so men and boys deserve our attention now. And I want to be clear, the struggle of men and boys is real and they deserve real response. But the conclusion being drawn that women's progress is the cause that investing in women comes at the expense of men is not supported by evidence. It is the zero-sum framing in a situation that is simply not zero-sum, and we really need to stand up for it. So let's look at where women actually are, right? According to the World Economic Forum, the estimate is that to achieve full gender parity globally, that's going to take us 130 years. 130 years at the current pace. That is our great grandchildren, people, right? Now, moving on, women globally receive 2% of humanitarian aid funding directed specifically at their needs. That's 2%. And obviously, there is a famous number that women-led organizations are only 2% funded by venture capitalists. Now, moving into the UK, the gender pay parity gap is about 14% for full-time workers, and this rises sharply when women have children. Globally, nearly half of women-led civil society organizations supporting humanitarian response today are at the risk of closing down this year because of all the aid cuts. And here is one thing that I think about often. The women and girls, the work that they perform every single day, which is the unpaid care labor. The work that we perform is valued at about $10.8 trillion of unpaid care work every single year. That is 3 times the size of the global technology industry. It does not appear in any GDP figure. It is invisible and it's overly done by women. Now, one of the statistics that is used to argue that women have made it is that 41% of mothers in the US are now sole or primary breadwinners for their family. Now, that is held up as evidence of women's power. But is a woman working 2 jobs to keep her family afloat a sign of equality? Or is it a sign of economic structures that have failed her, that caregiving has no financial value, and that women have been left to absorb the shock alone? The rising breadwinner number is not a triumph, it is a response to economic abandonment. And we must be able to say so clearly and calmly when we hear that number to be justifying women's voices and services. We need to be able to say that progress on paper is not progress in life, and that people in this room, we know the difference, and we see it every single day. So let's make sure that when people make arguments about women's power on paper and try to explain that to us or mansplain it to us, we really want to make sure that we stand up with our voices about the voices that we hear and serve every single day. Now, what happens when, yes, we can stand up for it, but what happens when we lose women's organizations, which is what we are at the brink of right now? One of the organizations I had worked with a decade ago, we had partnered with them for various reasons, and it was a women's health services delivering organization. It had been running for over 12 years, and it delivered maternal health care, ran community workers, provided safe spaces for women leaving violent homes and abusive relationships. And the funding dried up and it had to shut down. And the assumption was that the government was going to absorb all these programs and people will still be served. But here's what actually happened. Within 6 months of the organization shutting down, the local maternal mortality had gone up, which is what we are seeing right now with all the aid cuts in the world. The boys in the area were being presented in school as trauma victims that had been previously addressed through the center's family support work. So even though it was supporting women and girls, the boys and the men were also taken care of. The community healthcare workers, who were all women, all local, all trusted, they all dispersed. And when the organization tried to get back on its feet 2 years later, they had to start from scratch because the relationship, the trust, the knowledge, it had all gone. Now, you can rebuild trust, but not from a spreadsheet, right? So, of course, let me bring this closer to home because most of you are from the UK. About 2 women are killed by a partner or a former partner every single week in the UK. The organizations that are keeping these women safe are overwhelmingly small, underfunded, and woman led. Right? And every pound invested in domestic violence services, there is an estimated £9 in savings in health, criminal justice, and social care costs. Now, defunding women's organizations looks like it's going to save money in the short run, but it does shift the cost somewhere else, and the bill is always higher. These are not women's issues alone. These are family issues, community issues, and economic issues. And most of all, they become global issues. And I know in the UK specifically that you're navigating something very particular right now, which is the weaponization of women's safety as a reason to keep women out of public life. Your right is sending you a message that women are not safe, stay at home. And from the well meaning progressive voices, sometimes the message is the same: we'll handle this, you stay back home. But both arrive from a protectionary lens, both result in women's voices being removed from public spaces, and it's a very old tactic in new clothes. All of you in this call, you are not supplementing the system. In many cases, you are the system for women who have nowhere else to go. And that voice needs to be louder and louder, as loud as we can get. Now, you know, I think that leads to when women get an opportunity, what happens? And I started my career as an engineer. I was designing products where I was integrating a gender lens into products. And in one of those visits, I actually met a midwife who showed me an agricultural tool that she used to cut the umbilical cord and give birth to babies in the middle of nowhere. Now, this was in India, in communities with very limited access to formal healthcare. And I went back to these women and asked them a simple question: what would make childbirth safer right now? And the answer was very simple. They gave me the 6 tools that they needed to give birth to a baby in a safe and sterile condition. And guess what? Those 6 tools matched with what the WHO had set as a protocol for decades, but there was no product to convert the protocol into a product that reached the poorest of the poor. Now, what we did as an organization was designed a product that went global, but not because it was a government program. We did not parachute in with a solution. We worked with women who understood the problem and who helped us design a solution with them for them. And they trusted us because we were there to serve them. Now, the birth kit there, a decade after, reached over 1 million mothers, impacted over 5 million babies across 11 countries. Each kit cost under $3, and each one addressed a gap the formal system had not closed. Now, I know some of you are thinking, well, that's a developing world story. We have NHS, and US has the best healthcare ever. But even in the UK, Black women are 4 times more likely to die in childbirth than white women. Only 1 in 5 women with perinatal mental health needs receive adequate care. And women with disabilities in the UK are twice as likely to experience domestic abuse and yet are consistently underserved by the mainstream healthcare system. It's because the systems are never designed with these women at the center. All your organizations exist and are being supported because those gaps exist, because the women you serve tell you exactly what their problems are because they live them. Now, the other aspect of this as well, of course, you can design programs for women, and they can have a gender lens, and they can focus on women and girls. But what about gender neutral organizations? I get this question all the time. Gender neutral organizations, according to people, have treat both sides equally, but they forget to understand that when we set up an organization for women and girls, we actually treat everybody equally. When you move to gender neutral organizations, there is enough proof to show that they have never consistently prioritized women's needs. Not trade unions, not corporations, not governments. When women are not explicitly centered, the inertia takes over, and the default is serve whoever there is, and that's alarmingly men. So when someone asks you, surely everything should be gender neutral, you now have an answer to say, show me one gender neutral organization that has consistently over time delivered for women without being specifically designed to do so. I have not found one yet. Now, research across 70 countries show that when women control household income, they invest 90% of it back in their family and communities, no matter where in the world. But when men control it, that figure is 30 to 40%. So investing in women is not a trade-off, it is a multiplier. And all your organizations are where that multiplier lives. Now, the history of women's movement everywhere in every era, it's not a storyline of one powerful woman breaking through. It is a story of women coming together, often with very little, often dismissed, often told that their work does not count, and often asked to change the way they do things. But the woman who built the first domestic violence refuge was not because she waited for some state to do it, because the state would not do it. The woman who created legal aid services, community kitchens, credit unions, and almost nothing in their own time because they could see what was needed and that they were the people best placed to provide that with the minimal resources they have. So all your organizations are a part of that tradition, and I want each one of you to own it. And you can own it by showing up. Now, I did not think in 2026 I was going to sit here and make a case of why women's organizations should exist. But here we are. And this is precisely the moment to show up, not go quiet. What does showing up look like? Knowing your value and saying it clearly, not apologetically, not wrapped in caveats, but women's organizations exist because when women are not explicit priority, their needs are not met. This is historically documented. We just need to say it as it is. We can all get frustrated, but part of showing up is having the calm, having the evidence ready to respond when it's needed. When someone says, surely everything should be gender neutral, you should have the answer. When someone says, women have already made it, you should have the answer. Anger is not our answer. We need to be clear. We need to also stay in community with each other. It's a part of showing up. This is not a moment for us to show up as individual heroines. The connections that you make in spaces like this are the ones that are going to matter for you and the woman that you serve. And I do believe that one thing that organizations that are led by women, because we are so emotional, we don't think about sustainability, specifically financial sustainability. It is not a betrayal of our values, but the deepest expression of them. The women who depend on you deserve your organizations to exist and still be there when they or someone like them is in need. And finally, I don't think I would do justice if I do not talk about AI, because everything is going to be shaped by AI. If women's voices and women's experiences are not in the room where these systems are being built, we are going to be locked out of them for a very, very long time, and it's actually happening. Please do not shy away from using AI tools, from showing up in rooms, even if you don't understand what it is. It's important for you to show up. We have to learn to use those tools, and we have to make sure that these tools absorb our values and show up for what we believe in and not erase them. Now, coming back to Anna, the last time I spoke to Anna, she had started a savings group. Now, for those of you who don't know what a savings group is, it is a group of women that get together and they save probably $1 every month. And these women actually have small boxes in which they put these savings. And it's a group of usually anywhere between 8 and 15 women. Now, they pool these small amounts of funds and they lend it to each other, which means that if the box now has $12, one woman in need gets access to the $12 and she pays a small fee for accessing the money. Some of these women also have a small box which says emergency expenses, which means that they can give it to a woman in need when there is an emergency without looking for a profit. And you will not believe the amount of money that women have been informally able to save in these boxes. Only in the continent of Africa, these boxes hold about $1 billion. And that is the power of women coming together and saving. Now, that said, Anna had started a small savings group and they were meeting weekly now. They knew that their families are not going to interfere with their decision-making process with their money. So they had started saving this money. And between them, they had created what no bank was never able to offer them. No government program had ever reached with them with. They had built this tiny informal organization, no office, no budget line, and it was working. It was trusted, and it was run by the very woman who understood exactly what women around them needed because they were those women. And here is something that I find both extraordinary and telling, which is informal savings groups like these are the essence of the women's movements, right? Like people can say, well, feminist organizations are extreme right. I mean, like I hear that all the time. Now, the power of these women, can you imagine what Anna was telling me is there's a lot of people approaching them now that they have money in these boxes to understand how much money is there and what they're doing with it. But the real reason these women are being approached is because the government sees the massive volume of this money and now wants to tax them. So I think that's where we all need to stand up together. And when we think about this $1 billion on the African continent in the small boxes, women supporting each other, lending to each other, having emergency boxes to support anyone who shows up at the time of need, only women can think this way. And I look at organizations in this room and I see the same thing. Different context, different country, different challenges, but the same fundamental truth. When women coming together, they build what is needed, they hold the trust of communities they serve. So the question is not whether we can afford to fund and support women's organizations. The question is whether our families, our communities, our economies, whether the world today can afford for us not to do it. Now, you all know why you do what you do. You feel it every day. And I'm here to tell you that you're right. And I hope each one of you leaves here today with the courage to keep going, with the belief that you're needed, and not just yourselves, but for every woman who depends on you. And I will end my keynote here just to make sure that I have time for enough questions. But I really hope that we all can, through this period of transition, maintain the courage that we need, show up with our full selves, because the world needs us. The world needs women who are leading organizations to support women and girls. And we have the ability to do it. And time again, we've proven everyone wrong. And we've proven that we can build a world to support everybody and achieve gender parity and include men in our movements. But we really need a voice, and we all are that voice. So I'm going to pass over to Rebecca to see if she has any questions and if she can moderate questions from others in this process.
Oh, Zubaida, I'm clapping. I've got my pen. I've been writing things down and questions to ask you. And that was so, so inspiring. Thank you very, very much. And we have had some questions in. Some have come through the Q&A box, and some have come in through the chat to the team. Um, and so I'm going to kick off with a question, which is, what are the biggest signs of progress you've seen women-led groups make in your career, and what concerns you most about the present moment? So what are the biggest signs of progress, and what are the moments that what concerns you most?
For me, the biggest signs of progress has been that we have been able to support women and we've been able to reduce poverty in the world. I think the number of people that are living in ultra poverty today, which is less than $1.50 a day, has been significantly reduced over the last 2 decades. I think we only have about 15 to 20% of the population of the world living in ultra poverty, and I would say that that has come through a movement of supporting women and investing in women. I also see the progress that we've been able to reduce maternal mortality, though not significantly globally. I see a lot of women showing up and claiming their voices, claiming their seats. What what does bother me is that the numbers at the top leadership level, women in CEO roles, women in board positions, women on public boards, they all seem to be very male driven, right? Like, for example,
Mm.
we work with farmer producer organizations in India, and a big push for us was to make sure that we are able to bring women to the boards of farmer producer organizations. I believe we were able to move the needle to 3% because it was next to nothing.
Mm.
And I thought that that number was pathetic. I was like, what are we doing? Right? But our donors seem to say, Zubeda, a in a state where husbands don't even know names of their wives, right? Having 3% is a huge success. So I feel like there is a little bit of unrest in moving the needle in one part of the world. But on the other side, I do feel women are still fighting for, the way we show up with cardiac symptoms is so different than how men show up, and there's no research. I believe just last year, a seat belt was invented that can actually help pregnant women through accidents, right? I'm like, the progress is slow, but it's there. So it makes me happy that there is progress, but it also makes me sad that, despite the push, the progress has been so slow. And that's why I say that we need to come together as a community. We learn from women in Africa who come with these savings groups. I feel like the West needs to adopt that. And it's not always about, us teaching them, but there's so much we have to learn from them when it comes to gender equity and gender parity, because the privilege that we have being in this room, I don't think those women have any of that, but still they show up with all the courage that they can, fighting for a place.
That's amazing. Thank you, Zubaida. And I've had a question in from Sudarshan, and she says, you said you did not think that you would be here in 2026 talking about why we need to invest in women's organisations. If we get it right from here on, what do you think would be our conversation titled in 30 years' time?
If we get it right in 30 years, we could be close to achieving gender parity. or in 30 years, we could be having a worse conversation than what we're having today. And I'll tell you why. Because we are in a world of a fast-paced movement of artificial intelligence. And
Mm,
I see it as an opportunity for us to, because humans are very hard to change, right? We all come with our unconscious bias and lens. But if we can get it right at this moment and we can use technology as a multiplier, we are able to unbias those systems from what humans carry. And
mm,
we will be able to achieve gender parity at a much faster rate than 130 years,
mm,
right? So either we use this opportunity at the pace at which it's growing to use technology and give our voice to it in a way that we can meaningfully achieve gender parity, or we lose the race. And I'm seeing over and over again. I was in New York 2 weeks ago. It was the conference was called, for whatever it's worth, it was the most influential woman in the world, and we had 130 women in the room. And I can tell you, panel after panel after panel, the leaders from the top corporate companies saying, we are going to be careful. We are going to proceed with caution. We want to make sure that we include everybody. Nothing wrong with it. But if you were to translate that to an all men's conference, you were going to see, we're going to go fast pace. We're going to get this.
mm,
We don't mind if
mm,
we get it wrong. We're going to go all in. And I think that shift worries me a little bit, because we
mm.
need to be embracing this technology, because this is the moment for us to embrace it and unbias generations of systems, or we will be left behind. And that worries me a lot for this moment. So, in 30 years from now, I really want to be in a place where we have embraced the technology and we've all done everything in our power to make sure that the biases we see around us, the problems that we see around us that are affecting women, can be fixed with technology, and there is a world, because we don't want 30 years from now boys interacting with AI and seeing that women are not supposed to be in boardrooms. Or
Yes.
we all need to be trad wives, which is a movement that's happening now. So that I worry about that, but I do believe that we have a moment, and I want to see women stepping up.
That's so interesting. And actually, we've had a couple of questions in around that might be quite UK specific, but might also speak to a broader global conversation. So, a question here from Mai, which is, how can we navigate the shrinking funding landscape to ensure that there is sustainability? And also, how can organisations become self sufficient? And I feel, Zubaida, you've got some really interesting thoughts about this that perhaps you'd like to expand on here.
So I do believe that many women's gender-based nonprofits look at funding. We sometimes we are scared of going outside our territory, and we don't believe that our problem resonates with, or we believe that our problem only resonates with a certain group of funders, right? I think there's a lot of innovative strategies that have come up. And I don't know why, as a nonprofit industry, we see revenue as a bad word, right? Everything that you hold, every knowledge database that you have is monetizable in a good way, right? And so seek consultants, seek people who are experts in helping you think through. Yes, your donor base is drying up, but there might be other pockets of funding that might not look like they're meant for you. Like think outside the box, think beyond the horizon, see where the basic structure of your work can become a module that can fit into other modules. Work with other organizations, like partnerships. I've been helping a lot of organizations now bring their back offices together and reduce redundant expenses, right? Like
Mm,
if you're a $10 million organization or a $1 million organization, there are 10 other $1 million organizations spending 100,000 on overheads every single month. How do you combine those? Like, there are
mm,
innovative ways for you to think about overheads, to think about structures, to think about revenue, to think about funding, to think about how you can serve organizations in your local community and
mm,
get paid for that service. And I think most of these can be looked at as a bridge. I see the moment today as not one of the moments we've not seen in history, but it is one of those deep moments where a lot of our organizations are under the radar for various things, but this is not the time to be worried. This is the time to collaborate. And I do believe that organizations led by women or even by men who have feminist values can collaborate and survive this little hump that we have and go through the next stage.
I really hope it's a little hump.
Well,
Phenomenal optimism.
hope is not a strategy. So we have to show up and we have to do the things we have to do.
That is very true. Hope is not a strategy. And there's another a question here from Andrea. That we've got a situation in the UK, we're seeing it globally, more, increasing like online and offline in real world, profound, deep racism and white supremacy manifesting in many, many different ways. And Andrea's described it as a hostile environment, and that's quite a UK phraseology. But how do you think women's organisations can operate in that very anti-migrant, anti-refugee, and very racist environment that so many organisations are currently grappling with?
Well, if it makes you feel better, I do believe it's a global movement. It has nothing to do with the
No, there's not exceptionalism for the UK here. I do know that.
at all. And I do believe that women have a higher emotional quotient than men, which works both to our advantage and our disadvantage. Right. And we are inherently very diverse in the way we show up and in the way we work. And this is the time maybe for us, sometimes we hesitate, and with no offense to anybody, but in times like this, you really need to think about your operational structure and how you are, how you show up, what you do. But it's also important to build boards that can be your voice, that can amplify your voice. Sometimes we take it for granted. We're like, oh, we've had this board for 10 years. They give us money, whatever. There's like a million reasons to stick to it. But this is the time I'm seeing that some organizations are changing their board to look at a diverse, neurodiverse board that has done this kind of work, like having people who've stood up for your values in the environment. And shuffling your board actually sends a different signal. Having your board members go out there, represent you, talk to you. Because as CEOs, yes, we are accountable to the board and we can only do so much because we are stretched between the operational and how we show up in fundraising. But having a board that is active, that goes out there, does that, represents your values, I think that brings a totally different dynamic. And if there is a time to shuffle your board, this is the time and this is the moment. With no offense to any of the current board members, I mean, like, even think about, can we exchange board members? Like, can your board member come to us and we go? I mean, like, these are good people, but sometimes just thinking about that little dynamic, I cannot tell you how much it changes how we represent ourselves in the world and fight racism. And, it's not just bringing people of color, it's bringing the right people that will be your voice and show up with your values.
Mm. And actually, leading on from that, we've had a question actually about whether, when you were at Grameen Foundation, whether what you did to sort of shift power in relation to the role of white leaders in philanthropy and sort of dismantling and reimagining that role of money in building women's and girls against that backdrop of racism and white supremacy. Did you do kind of specific things within the foundation to do that?
I don't think we directly work towards racism, but here, listen, 90% of the money comes from white people, right? And they dictate what you do and what you don't. And I don't mean white people in a very generic sense. I mean people, a lot of billionaires who hold money, right? That's what I mean. And and sometimes it becomes very hard to say no to big money coming in.
Mm.
And I think that was my success because I was able to say no to money that didn't align with our values and didn't want to work in systems architecture. Because what we wanted to do at Grameen through Invest in Her Power, which was the name of our strategy, was one to dismantle the word empowerment. Like, who are we to give power to women? Right? I mean, like, think about all these women we serve in the world. Think about us. We have so much power. You don't need to come and empower us, right? Like, it's as if it's power of somebody to bestow on somebody else. That's so disgraceful. But just changing that narrative made a lot of donors question us. It's like, what are you doing? Like, you're supposed to say the sad story of these women. You're supposed to display, tell me like the sobbing story, like I want to cry. And I'm like, no, I'm going to tell you a story of why this woman is powerful and why you need to get out of her way and how the global colonialistic history has led to that woman being where she is.
Mm,
So, the refusal of trying to push back on, I am not going to tell you a sad story. I'm going to tell you the reality. I think that
mm,
was fighting racism in a way, right?
mm,
And was there pushback? Like my board was like, what are you doing? Like if the donors want you to tell a story, like you tell a story. And I was like, but that's not why you brought me in. You didn't bring me in because you wanted the donors to be happy. You brought me in
mm,
because you wanted me to help the women and you wanted me to
mm,
help them get out of poverty. And am I going to work with men? Yes, I am going to, because without working with those men, like those women are not in a situation to walk out of a relationship if they wanted to, right? And so that pushback, I think, was how I dealt with it, is being very firm with who you are, why you want to show up. And did we lose some money? Yes. Did we say no to some money? Yes. But did we
mm.
get new money? Yes. Right?
Yeah.
Uh, I think that's where you have to show up with, again, when you show up with who you are and the right values, yes, it's going to be hard, but you're going to have success at the end of the day. And like I said, this is a hump and we will need to cross it. And there will be humps every time we question the system.
So interesting. And I've got a question here. In the UK, we do find, I think it's true across the world actually, that some funders seem to see frontline work with women and girls as being a sort of a different category to systems change. And systems change is the buzzword, and there's a lot of desire to invest in that. And what, in our experience at Rosa, what gets lost from that is that really critical, important work, funding that frontline work. And so, how would you say we could persuade those funders that working with individual women and girls does contribute to systems change?
You know, um, it's very hard. Let me put it that way. Because we live in a world that is very patriarchal, right?
Mm,
Like think about, I'm sitting on this chair, it's very uncomfortable. It was not designed. I opened a glass door to enter a hotel. That door was not designed for me. It was designed for a 6 feet man. I'm sitting in the air conditioning in my house. My boys are sweating and I'm freezing because the air conditioning systems were not designed for women's bodies. They were designed for men with suits, right? So
mm,
we live in a world that is surrounded by deeply entrenched patriarchal design. I'm not even going to call it patriarchal. It was built for a working man.
mm,
Now, to dismantle that, sometimes we might have to change the narrative, right? Like we don't, some people understand systems change, some people don't.
mm,
And adapting our story to position ourselves as, you know, sometimes we get stuck with the frontline work and we forget to think about convincing a man who's very convinced that he is gen he believes in gender equality, but he doesn't. He's mansplaining things to you. It's very hard, and sometimes you need to go with the narrative, but and we've gone with the narrative sometimes, but we have changed the story during when we position
mm.
impact, right? It's like you gave us money for this, but this is what we did, and this is how we achieved it. It does align with your goals, but it did change the systems in such and such a way. And in the future, again, are we taking the burden of convincing somebody who's mansplaining to us? Yes, because that's where the money lies. I'm not going to say no. But
Mm.
picking who you can convince is also an art and a skill in itself, right? Like I live and breathe fundraising. Like all I've done my life is fundraised for these
Yeah,
causes.
yeah.
And sometimes it's frustrating. Like I remember giving a keynote at a conference which was 99% white men. No offense to them. And I was talking about our strategy, which is investing in our power, investing in her power. And this man walked up to me and he says, you don't look like a woman who has any power in her life. Like, what are you going to help these women get power?
Uh-huh.
Right? And I'm like, wow. And for a second, my response to him was the mere fact that you can come and ask me this question shows how much power I have to explain to you what the real world is.
Mhm.
Right? Now, that conversation, of course, he became a donor later, but he came with a mindset of this woman looks so pathetic. Like she seems like she's like wearing a hijab and, her husband's controlling her. Somebody forced her to do this. But I mean, like those are narratives that people hold in their head. And that's where the showing up comes. The more you show up, the more people see you, the more, I mean, like, fundraising is not, I meet you, you give me money. Fundraising is I build trust. You see me over and over again saying the same thing because it takes 10 or 11 times for something to stick in somebody's head. Rebecca, I've seen you maybe twice before. The fourth time I meet you after this, you and I are going to have a trust relationship that basically we could have never built by meeting once in a conference, right? This is just, we will not have any exchange of cash or money, but even that trust, right? For
Yeah,
you to say, I invited Zubaida to my conference, I think you should too. That's going to take 5 interactions between you and I just to say that,
yeah.
right? So sometimes we get impatient, but it is a process. And it is a process of showing up over and over again. And I know it's exhausting, but we don't have an option.
No, such an important. I completely trust you. I just want to put that out there. And I'd recommend you to everybody, as would everybody in our chat. I can absolutely guarantee that. There's a lot of love coming through for you, Zubaida. And I've got a message here from a question here from Olivia. She quotes the point that you made of you can't change the outside world for a woman whose inside world does not value her. And she feels that was a very powerful statement. And our question is, do you believe there are ways to maintain the momentum, the gains, and the intentional focus achieved in advancing women and girls to date, while also taking action towards those on her inside world, as in men and boys?
You know, we there is momentum. I'm not going to say there is no momentum. I think the more and more there is pushback, the more and more we are showing up as women and girls, as organizations. Now, is it coming at us much harder? Yes, right? But let's say, God forbid, we have to shut down one of our organizations. Now, does that mean that that momentum dies? Maybe to an extent. But that momentum will only live if you trust in who you are and you show up. Like, I'm not saying, I'm not saying go today, go back home and tell your husband to cook for the next lifetime that is left, right? Like, if that's not happening, that's not happening. But finding the if you're mothers to boys, like I'm a mother to a boy, and I remember sitting in front of the television and watching a political debate, and my 15-year-old was looking at the television saying, why is she looking at him like that? I'm not going to give you names, but and I was like, why are you thinking about why is she looking at him like that? Why aren't you thinking about why is he standing like that, and why isn't he having solid arguments, right? Now, even for my son, the first thing he noticed in the debate was her body posture and her face expression, right? We are living this. Does it worry me as a mother? Yes. But was it a teaching moment? Yes. Now, was that a moment of me standing up for myself and my home? Yes, even I have to, right? And so all I'm saying is we need to show up. And the other thing I want to say is our organizations don't define us, right? The organizations we build are a means to an end. But we,
Mm.
as the champions of women, will always find a home wherever, and our organizations will find a home. So don't let the work you do define you. And I think that's also important in believing who we are and standing up for ourselves. Now, when we spoke to all these women in our household dialogues, a lot of the women in my team realized that they don't eat meals with the family at the table. They are serving when everybody's eating and they eat last. And this was not even women from the developing world, right? Sometimes I realize I'm serving people and I'm not eating at the table. And now it's become a habit that the food is served, everybody sits together, right? It's such a subtle change, but it makes a whole difference because the seat, again, we can talk at seat at the table in our old dining tables, but also seat at the table in many different global forums. But we are finding a seat in the table where the table was never built for us. And that's
Mm,
hard,
mm,
right? And most of us are working in a space where we are defining what that table should look like. And that's what scares people is that they believe if they build a different table, then they will not want a seat here. And we are majority men. But what
yeah,
people don't get is that new table is going to be all inclusive because this table was designed for men and you're force fitting women. And that new table has to come soon.
absolutely. Now, Zubaida, there's lots more questions, and we've got 5 minutes, but I know that you've got another event to do. So, can I ask you one more question? Is that going to be okay? You've got time
Yes,
for
yes.
us? That's really, really good. I mean, there are absolutely loads of questions coming through. So, if you talked a bit at the beginning about what you want us to leave with you today, but I do wonder about in a very difficult climate for women and girls. Can you remind us what brings you hope and what you want us to take away in terms of hope?
Like I said, hope is not a strategy, right? And so for me, it's about showing up every day because I want a world, for me, I want a world where women and girls are treated equally and with respect so that my boys are valued and respected in that world. Because I know that for them, if they are not going to respect their partner, they're not going to see a workplace, they're not going to see a professional life where women are treated equally, that's a disservice to them. Right. And so for me, I think that's what motivates me every day. And going
Mm,
back to the childhood interaction that I had with my grandmother, I still feel like people are knocking at doors when we're saying come back later because men are not there, and we should not be saying that. Right. Like
yeah.
we want to change that narrative. And I still feel it happens. Right. So for me, what motivates me, the more people talk about creating a world for men and boys, I feel like creating a world for women and girls is the only way to create a world for men and boys. And that's
Mm,
what motivates me, if that helps. That's a very nice
absolutely.
end to a professional conversation.
No, I think it's really, really important. As I said at the very beginning, we were inspired to reach out to you having read your article, and we will post a copy of the article into the chat, a link to it from Alliance magazine, which tends to be aimed at the sort of funder sector. And because it was such an important articulation, as you have done for the last hour, in why women, that focusing on women and girls is not that kind of zero sum game at which it's either men and boys or it's women and girls. And actually, as you've also said, so much of that focus on men and boys does so with kind of inaccurate data about the lives of women and girls, and it ends up blaming women and girls and causing them more harm. And so I think it's fantastic to meet you, for you to be able to address our conference, and all that you have achieved and all that we know that you will carry on achieving. So I want to really, really thank you for joining us today, for getting up at the crack of dawn to join us, and to be part of the Rosa Conference for 2026. Thank you so much, Zubaida.
Oh no, thank you, Rebecca, for having me, for reading the article. And I think it's so important that I show up in spaces like this because that's one of the ways in which I communicate what I think. And today there's an article that's out there that says that the whole thing that men and women don't share burden of care is wrong, and that both men and women in today's world are 50-50 partners in sharing the
Wow.
burden of care economy. And I almost fell off my chair this morning. And I was like, hold on, when did this happen? I don't even see it
Happened
happen
last night.
in my household. But here you go. So I do believe there's a lot of narratives that are pushing against what we stand for, and falsifying our statements. And the more we can come up calmly with certainty, with data and stories, the more we can push back and create a world that's going to be better for all of us, for generations to come, and our organizations.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much. I
So
really
much.
appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca, and thank you, everyone.
Brilliant. So we're now coming to the end of our conference. I want to repeat again a huge thank you to Zubaida for agreeing to be our keynote speaker today and for speaking so powerfully, both about her own work, but also for helping to put the work that the women and girls sector does, so many organisations here today do, into that wider global context. And so now I'm here to do the final words of the conference for today. I'd like to remind you that tomorrow is a whole new day. We have a strong programme all day tomorrow of training starting at 9 a.m. And the training covers things like developing a theory of change, safeguarding, getting started with AI, Zubaida would be pleased to know, as well as finance and fundraising. So I really hope you can join us again tomorrow. The purpose of today has been to offer you chances to be inspired, to gain useful skills and ideas, to strengthen your work, and to connect with peers and the wider sector. And I really hope that you have experienced that and that you hope that the day has succeeded in doing that. But please do tell us what you think. There are quick polls about each session available in the event lobby. We'd be very grateful if you can fill in the event feedback survey, which we'll send to you via email once the whole conference is complete tomorrow. And this morning I had the privilege of opening the conference and of hearing the speakers at the Voices from the Sector panel. And throughout the day, there have been crucial conversations and discussions touching on so many themes that are presenting both challenges and opportunities facing women's and girls' organisations right now. And my mind is really buzzing with what Zubaida had to say. I think she really did share so many insights and thoughtful ways in which so many of us who are running women's organisations can think about the work that we do. And in my session this morning, I asked the panelists what brings them hope, and I repeated that question today to Zubaida, because I think sometimes in these quite dark times it can be, and difficult times, it can be easy to forget. And I'd love for any of you to share your thoughts in the chat. But for me, it's days like today. It's hearing from all of you, either as speakers on panels or your conversation in the chat. And it's meeting many of you throughout the year, either in person or at events. One of our speakers this morning, I think it was Bethan, said that the resilience of women and girls gave her hope. And I must say, I feel the same about our sector. I think that women's and girls' organisations are phenomenal places of joy, of trust, and of resilience. And yet I also think, well, why the hell should we be resilient? It can at times feel like the whole world depends on women and girls being resilient, not making a fuss, not taking up space, not asking for more than the minimum. And I feel that Zubaida touched on that very, very well. And I worry that this is also an expectation of women's and girls' organisations. And that is why Rosa exists. We exist to mobilise the money, the resources and the support that you need, and to encourage other funders to do the same, so that you can make demands, so that you can take up space, and so that you, as women's and girls' organisations, can always, always state what you need as well as what you want. In fact, I think that our society today depends on you doing that and depends on you getting that. I really hope you leave the Rosa Annual Conference knowing that you are not alone, that there are so many individuals and organisations across the country and across the world keen to see you thrive and flourish, because what you do is vital. And as I said this morning, and I say as often as possible, your work, the work of women-led women's and girls' organisations, has proved throughout history to be the only route to creating genuine, positive and lasting change for women and girls. And that is why Rosa will continue to stand alongside you, championing your work, raising your voices and advocating for the recognition, sustainability and funding that the women and girls sector deserves. And that's it for our conference for today. I'd like to hugely thank the Rosa staff team who really helped, make this conference. And I'd like to once again thank Cummins for their generous funding to enable us to run this conference each year. But also, most importantly, I'd like to thank all of you for coming along, for being on speaker panels, for speaking in sessions, for sharing your thoughts and ideas. We couldn't do any of this without you, so thank you so much. And goodbye for today.